Hi everybody, and thanks for joining in this month's training, performance horse nutrition training with DAC dealers and sales staff. To the dealers that are on the call, we're really thankful that you're on the call and hope that you get a lot out of it. Now, this month, our product that we were focusing on and highlighting is the DHA Perform. But you can notice I've also got Cougar there. Now, last month we didn't really do a training because of DAC days, but I wanted to go over some new information that I've got about the Cougar as well that I think will help you in selling your products. Now, really the goal here is, you come onto these calls and I impart this education on you, and then hopefully the sales reps, your goal is then to take it to your dealers so that the dealers, they're the ones that are communicating with the end user and answering the most questions. So our role is really to educate the dealers so that they can answer questions from the customers to the best of their ability and really represent DAC well as a company of higher education. So I know some of you probably saw these slides during the DAC Days presentation if you were in-house or on the Facebook live stream, but I wanted to go over them in a little bit more detail. Recently I gave a presentation on top line. Everybody asked about top line, and I feel like I try to tell a story. I try to break it down so that people can understand each part. And when I talk about top line, that's not what I talk about. I start out talking about amino acids and how amino acids turn into protein and how protein is what makes muscle. And what is top line? It's muscle. So what affects top line is whatever affects muscle. So before we start talking about our DHA products, I feel like we need to start with fatty acids. We know that omega-3s are a hot topic. Really people have been talking about these for the last 4 or 5 years, and in human nutrition even longer than that. But let's break it down into the very basics and build from there so we can have a bit better understanding of what we're talking about. So what is a fatty acid? It's a building block of the fat that's either in the horse's body, or it's a building block to the fat that's in the food that horses eat. It's an energy storage unit. The body can break down and use fatty acids for energy if there's not enough blood sugar. That would be our calm, slow release energy. It takes a lot longer to get that, so it's slower energy. Essential fatty acids cannot be made in the body. They have to be eaten. That's true for any time you use the term essential. If people use it correctly, it means that the body can't make it. It has to be consumed. Omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids are considered essential, both of them. And I know omega-6 fatty acids seem to get a little bit of a bad rap, but really they're both essential in the horse's diet. And this pathway shows how some people disregard omega-6s. They are linoleic acid, and through the pathways that it gets broken down into, it can become part of the body's inflammatory response. So some call it a pro-inflammatory nutrient. It's very, very important that you have an inflammatory response. If you get stung by a bee or you have some kind of toxic substance that you need to remove from the body through inflammation. Inflammation draws nutrients to the area to heal whatever injury is there. So it's very important that you have an inflammatory response, but we already know that the equine diet today, which is high in cereal grains, has a lot of omega-6 fatty acids. So instead of needing to add a lot to the diet, we really try and boost the omega-3 fatty acid part of the diet. Alpha-linolenic acid. And through these pathways, EPA and DHA, so the conversion of linolenic acid to EPA and DHA, we get these anti-inflammatory properties. And that is probably one of the most commonly regarded properties of omega-3 fatty acids. I put this slide in, this graphic, because as we've said, a lot of us take what we learn from human nutrition and try and apply it to equine or animal nutrition. And these are some terms that we hear commonly in human nutrition. So I figured I'd throw it up there so we can kind of see where omega-3 fatty acids fit into terminology that we're a little more familiar with. So fats and fatty acids can get broken down into saturated fats, our animal fats, butter, lard that come from animal products, or unsaturated fats. Now, unsaturated fats can be broken down into polyunsaturated fats or monounsaturated fats. The omega-9 fatty acids, which come from olive oil, avocados, peanuts, almonds, they are not considered essential in the equine body. They can be made in the equine body, not in the hindgut, but in the horse's system, they can make omega-9 fatty acids. Now, omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids are considered polyunsaturated fatty acids. Omega-6 fatty acids are high in corn oil, safflower oil, and sunflower oil. Omega-3 fatty acids, they actually get broken down into three major categories: eicosapentaenoic acid, docosahexaenoic acid, and alpha-linolenic acid. Now, they get abbreviated as EPA, DHA, and ALA. The ALA, or alpha-linolenic acid, comes from our plant-based sources, our flaxseed, soybean, walnuts, rapeseed, or otherwise known as canola oils. It's the EPA and the DHA that comes from fish or marine sources like algae. Now, this graphic, I know a lot of you have probably seen if you've seen me give presentations before, but as I mentioned, there are three different types of omega-3 fatty acids. The primary, alpha-linolenic acid, ALA, has to get broken down or converted to EPA and DHA in order in the animal to have the benefit of anti-inflammatory properties, cardiovascular health, all the things that we have heard that omega-3 fatty acids can do. The ALA that you get from flax, hemp, chia, camelina, any other plant source, that is not directly used by the animal. It's not directly used by you either. And the conversion from that type of omega-3 to DHA and EPA is quite poor. So we need to make sure that we're feeding direct sources of DHA and EPA. And where do we get those from? As we mentioned in the earlier slide, we get them commonly from marine oils, fish oil, or algae. So taking this into account is why we decided to come out with DHA Perform. We wanted to, I commonly get asked, or was getting asked, what is the omega-3-6 ratio in the DAC oil? There became a need for a true omega-3 fatty acid supplement in our product range that we did not have before. And filling that product with plant-based sources like flax, chia, hemp was really not going to cut it because, as we've mentioned, those aren't adequately converted. And I really feel like they just waste people's money. So we decided to put together an algae-based supplement. It almost looks like a little bit of a flake. It has a slight marine smell, but the amount of actual DHA in this product is considerable. Now, if you ever have any issues with getting horses to eat it, we recommend that you gradually introduce this to horses. If you wet it, it will really turn into a soupy slurry. So if you wet it and mix it throughout the product, throughout the feed. Also, you know I like to split meals up. So this is one that if you're feeding the higher rates of the 4 to 6 ounces, I really do recommend that you try and feed, say, 2 ounces in the morning, 2 ounces at your lunchtime feed, and 2 ounces at your evening feed to really break it up. You'll notice that it's very light, and so volume-wise, 6 ounces of DHA Perform is a lot more in volume than, say, 6 ounces of a vitamin mineral supplement like the DAC Orange. So 1 ounce of DHA Perform will supply you 4.8 grams of DHA 2 ounces 9.6, all the way up to 6 ounces will supply you close to 30 grams. And how I came up with those feeding rates is based on the literature, based on the research. The research says that anywhere between 4 and 30 grams per day can be beneficial to the horse for a multitude of different disorders, be it inflammation, cardiovascular health, which means stamina, pulmonary health. We'll talk about bleeders in a minute. Neurological function, immune function, performance, enhancing exercise tolerance, supporting normal muscle recovery, helping with stamina and endurance, and also supporting normal recovery after exercise, helping support that muscle recovery. Why? Because it's decreasing inflammation. Inflammation is the root of it's the start of all problems in the body. Whether it be gastric ulcers or muscle dysfunction, laminitis, inflammation starts all of those. So if we can decrease inflammation, nip that in the bud, then we can stop the progression of all other disorders. Osteoarthritis as well, joint disease, starts with inflammation. So if we can stop the inflammation, we can really slow or stop the progression of those other disorders. I have a couple of references here. If any of your clients want to see the research, don't hesitate to contact me, because this is one ingredient where there is a slew of research in humans, in other livestock species, and in particular in horses. There are a lot of research studies. Now, the other benefit to DHA, which it's not our focus for this month, but I will be remiss to not mention it, is DHA is very effective at improving semen quality in stallions, and there's even been some research looking at ovarian function in mares. So our Breeders Excel product also has these very, very high amounts of DHA. So I mentioned the airway disorders, our recurrent airway obstruction, RAO, or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, commonly abbreviated as HEAVES. They're similar to asthma. They're an allergic reaction to inhaled particulates. So it's an inflammation. Those air passages become inflamed. That's chronic cough. Also, this is slightly different, but equine-induced pulmonary hemorrhage, bleeders. It's not an inflammation of the airways due to an inhaled particulate, like an allergy to dust. It's also not a blood clotting issue. Horses that suffer from bleeding out of the nostrils, like standardbreds or thoroughbreds, do not have low vitamin K, and they don't have issues with blood clotting. What they have is an inflexibility of those cell walls. So vitamin K isn't necessarily effective at dealing with horses with bleeders, because, as I said, it's not an issue that these horses have low vitamin K, and it's not an issue with blood clotting. But what has been shown in the research is that omega-3 fatty acids, because they play a role in increasing the flexibility of the cell walls, then we decrease and we're strengthening the red blood cell membranes. We can make those membranes stronger, and when the heart rate increases and the blood thickens and it's pumping fast, then it's not bursting those blood vessels. It has been shown that supplying DHA to horses that suffer from equine-induced pulmonary hemorrhage significantly reduces the incidence of bleeding. So, DHA for any of your bleeders, whether that be a standardbred buggy horse or race horse, a thoroughbred. Some quarter horses, especially that are barrel racing, also suffer from it. I know the DHA, you oftentimes hear me say, if a supplement is claimed to do everything, it's probably too good to be true. Now, I don't want to claim that DHA will do everything, because it certainly will not replace a vitamin and mineral supplement like your DAC Orange or your Total Performance or a Colt Grower. But the benefits that it has will benefit a variety. Pretty much every horse could benefit from DHA Perform. performance horses, buggy horses, working horses, senior horses, growing horses, broodmare stallions. Why? Because just life in general puts the animal into an inflammatory state, especially if you're doing extra exercise or you're aging. We know those states increase inflammation. There's even a term called inflammaging, because we know in the aged horse, inflammation is a natural part of aging. We know that inflammation is a huge part of metabolic disease. We also know that allergies, hives, heaves, and bleeders benefit from DHA. So this isn't necessarily a product that you can recommend to every horse because it is a little more expensive. So for the budget conscious person that can only afford one product, you're still better off going with the DDA as a digestive health supplement, as the first supplement that you sell. The digestive system is the largest immune organ in the body. So if we can boost the internal health of the animal by unlocking more nutrients out of the food, that's the best way. That is number one, the best first place to start with any of our customers. But when we're looking for more from our performance horses, buggy horses, etc., then DHA is the next supplement that I would be recommending. So as far as the gastric ulcers and colonic ulcers, I know that we've heard a lot about the incidence of ulcers. We know that horses, we've seen the statistics that gastric ulcers in performance horses are up around 90%, colonic ulcers over 60%. Very rare for horses that are doing exercise not to have ulcers. And the majority, over 50% of performing horses actually have gastric and colonic ulcers. It's really a function of how we keep horses. We're maintaining horses now on very little grass. Most have no access to pasture when the horse evolved to really graze about 17 hours out of the day. And continually, it's not like they grazed for 17 hours and then they just stopped and stood still for the rest of the time. They broke that up. So really for 24 hours, they had a small amount of food constantly trickling through their digestive system. And that is how the digestive system is designed. And it hasn't changed. Even though we keep horses in stalls and we meal feed them, their digestive system has not adapted to the way we keep them. And as a result of that, we see a significant increase in gastric ulcers and colonic ulcers. In speaking with an equine insurance adjusters, the largest complaint in equine insurance cases these days is gastric ulcers. And I think if you ask most vets, that would be their most common ailment as well. So to the gastric ulcers, I oftentimes get asked, what symptoms will I see in my horse? Because unlike laminitis, where there are some very classic laminitic symptoms, gastric ulcer symptoms aren't always the same. But really what I notice in most horses as one of the first symptoms is a behavior change. Sometimes it will be an aggressive type behavior or a nervous behavior. Some people think, oh, all of a sudden my horse is really spooky and hot. But it could actually be more of a discomfort, aggression. A lot of times when we go down the shed row in a training facility for thoroughbreds or standardbreds, the horses will be, uncomfortable. They'll be aggressive, putting their ears back a lot. And oftentimes that's due to a discomfort from gastric ulcers. Other things, sometimes colic-like symptoms because of that discomfort. Poor appetite, picky eating, which leads to weight loss and poor performance. Sometimes this diarrhea. If the horse isn't able to digest, if they're not getting the nutrients out of the food because, number one, they're not eating it, then their hair coat and hoof condition are two things that you'll notice go downhill when the horse's diet is not being fulfilled. Pain, distress, you'll notice that either in just a change in behavior or they'll be grinding their teeth or clenching their jaw. Pain and discomfort when you're putting either tack, whether it be a girth or harness, on areas where that might be painful, around the girth or over the flank. What causes ulcers? This is just an overall increased acidity in the gut because we're feeding a lot more grain and a lot less forage. We're exercising them heavily, and we're getting the splash effect of the acid splashing up into the top part of the stomach. This intermittent feeding, transport stress, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug use has gone skyrocketed, and that really wears away at that protective coating in the stomach, allowing that acid access to the tissue. This is an interesting graph, and I like to show this graphic as well. This shows, at the bottom of the stomach, the liquid is very acidic, pH of 1 to 2, and as we go up the stomach into this non-protected region up here, you see that the liquid is now more neutral. As we exercise the horse more intensively, start trotting, cantering, going up hills, you can see these graphs represent pressure on the internal organs. And you can see here, this top line here is the pressure on the stomach. And you can see it really increasing. And so what happens when you start to squeeze on that stomach is that strong acid down the bottom starts to get pushed all the way up into that non-protected region, over that distinct line called the margo plicatus, up into that non-protected region, and that's where we see the stomach ulcers most predominantly. This was some interesting data that I got from the Muriel website, looking at the incidence of stomach ulcers in the different disciplines of horses. And you can see it with the most stressful, I would say, disciplines, racing, harness, sometimes even the saddle seat, primarily because these horses never go outside. And racing and harness horses really have to eat very large quantities of grain to maintain the training rigors and high-speed racing. So these guys have a really stressful, highly acidic gastrointestinal tract. And this one is also very interesting, the sick and starved foals. Because of the stress on them, they're almost 100% at risk of getting stomach ulcers. So as I mentioned earlier when we were talking about DHA, that inflammation, this is normal, what a normal gut tissue looks like. So there's blood vessels feeding these little finger-like structures on the inside of the stomach and the intestine. And these finger-like structures, what they're there for, they're called villi, and they increase the surface area of the intestine and the stomach so that there's more area to absorb nutrients, really. And so what's happening is we get inflammation from stress and acidity, and it erodes away. First of all, starts to erode away at that top layer, all of those finger-like structures, and then down into the blood vessels and down more into the tissue. And these ulcerated areas are not absorbing nutrients. They're very painful. So horses produce up to around 5 gallons of gastric acid each day. Horses without constant access to feed are less likely to develop gastric ulcers, because when they have constant access, we all know when you chew food, you produce saliva. Horses are the same. And so the longer they're chewing, the more saliva they're producing. And that saliva is the natural way to buffer stomach acid. So these were some interesting statistics on the amount of times people do research studies where they'll put what we call a bite meter on the horse's halter or jaw and feed them different feeds and in different management styles, and see how many bites, therefore how much saliva will be produced, because the more times you chew, the more saliva you're producing. So let's say we take 2 pounds of oats. Now we're feeding it at chest height. 2 pounds of oats versus 2 pounds of hay. And you can see, this is off the floor, 1,000 chews or jaw sweeps for 2 pounds of oats. 2 pounds of hay, it's double. So because of the longer fiber length, you really have to chew that a lot more. So now we get 2,000 chews for 2 pounds of hay. If we take that sweet feed and we put it where we commonly put horse feed, is at chest height in a bucket, we've halved the amount of time it took to chew the 2 pounds of oats. And this is because when a horse chews and puts his head down on the ground and then he lifts it up and he chews, he's very relaxed and he's up and down slowly chewing on that. But if we put it at chest height, there's not a lot of room for him to kind of stretch his neck down and back up. So you can see it's makes sense that the amount of chews is a lot less than when he's eating off the ground. So that's another recommendation. For numerous reasons, you'll hear me say put the feet on the ground. Also to slow a horse down to reduce the incidence of choke. So what else can you do to ameliorate or reduce the incidence of gastric ulcers? Well, we know that alfalfa is very high in calcium, and that calcium is also going to help as an antacid. It's like the Tums. It's going to help buffer that stomach acid. Frequent meals, if we can break up the grain into small amounts throughout the day, as well as constant access to hay or pasture. The DDA will help stimulate appetite. As you noted, one of the symptoms was a decrease in appetite. Anytime you can reduce the amount of grain that you're feeding to give them calories and give them calories from oil for weight gain or energy is ideal. And then we also have our product that we recently launched called the Cougar. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But the colonic ulcers, again, less frequent but more severe than the gastric ulcers. Common symptoms are intermittent colic, chronic diarrhea. Now, these red marks are the ulcerated lesions on the tissue. The hindgut of the horse, made up of the cecum, large colon, and small colon, the colon where these lesions are occurring, is the largest part of the horse's digestive system. So, if you decrease the absorptive capacity of the colon of the horse, number one, you're going to reduce the nutrients that horse is absorbing. Also in the small colon, we get water absorption. Okay, well, if the tissue is damaged, it's not going to absorb water. So number one, you're going to see diarrhea because it's not being absorbed, so it's got to come out. And then the horse will be dehydrated. And dehydrated horses, dehydration occurs very quickly in horses. So the recommendation is pelleted or cubed forage, because that long stem forage can be quite abrasive to the hindgut, for about 2 to 4 weeks, so that we can start to get some healing of that tissue. Yeast extract, live cell yeast extract, is known to help stabilize hindgut pH. So if we can decrease the acidity of the hindgut, then we can help to heal that, decrease the acid that's burning away at those that tissue and help to heal that. The yeast extract is one of the key components in the Cougar, as well as anytime, as with the stomach ulcers, anytime you can add more calories from oil and less from grain, that's ideal. So let's look a little bit more at the key ingredients in the Cougar. Okay, so L-glutamine. L-glutamine is an amino acid. When I say it's the preferred energy source in the upper intestinal tract, that means it is used by the cells that make up the gastrointestinal, those little finger-like villi, that they need to be fed by something. Those cells need to survive, and one of the main nutrients that feeds those cells is an amino acid called L-glutamine. Damage to the intestinal mucosa, so if those cells get damaged, then we need L-glutamine to repair those. A lot of times they use L-glutamine treatments in people following surgery, radiation, and burns. So calcium carbonate, the next ingredient in the product, it is in there, as we said, like the alfalfa, but at much higher doses, to act as an antacid, to coat the gut from the acid, like the Tums for people. Saccharomyces cerevisiae, or the live cell yeast, stabilizes the pH, so it stops it getting too acidic in the hindgut. Now, it does not stabilize the acidity of the stomach. That's why we put the calcium carbonate in there. The Saccharomyces cerevisiae that we use is microencapsulated so that it is not broken down by the stomach acid. or the enzymes in the small intestine, but we want it to make it all the way to the hindgut, the large intestine of the horse. Prebiotics like FOS and MOS, fructooligosaccharide is FOS. It's a non-digestible fiber, and it supports good bacteria that also help to maintain that intestinal lining. It is used in the repair and regeneration of those damaged cells as well. MOS does similar things to FOS, but also binds harmful bacteria that may be proliferating in that if that intestinal lining becomes compromised. The DHA, it reduces inflammation. What's going on in these ulcers? First of all, it's inflammation. Before we get that ulcerative lesion, we have inflammation. Glycine is another amino acid that may mildly inhibit gastric acid in the stomach. Now, unlike something like GastroGuard or UlcerGuard that use what we call proton pump inhibitors or omeprazole that completely block the acid is there for a reason. We don't want to block that acid long term. I wanted people to be able to feed cool gut long term. So that's why I put glycine in there as a mild, so it might just decrease some of that gastric acid secretion, but it's certainly not going to turn it off completely. Whey protein concentrate also helps protect that mucosal tissue. So the stomach ulcer grading system, and it's a 0 to 4. You can see in this image, this is that non-protected light pink tissue. That dark pink tissue in the bottom of the photograph there is protected by a slippery, slimy mucus coating. But you can see this is nice and bright. There's no appearance of reddening. If we scope the horse and we say grade 1 ulcers, there's no lesions, there's no bumps, but there are slight areas of reddening. You can see that it's not as light and bright as in a grade 1. There's areas of reddening. Grade 2, we start to see individual or multiple ulcers, more distinct red patches. Grade 3 ulcers has large singular or multiple ulcers. Now we've actually started to erode away. So here we have mild inflammation, moderate inflammation. Now the inflammation in grade 3 ulcers has actually eroded away, and we have mild erosion in those ulcers. Grade 4, these are extensive ulceration all around, deep, deep areas of ulceration. Now in our test case, we fed a horse the cool gut. We scoped the horse first. And you can see she had grade 3 ulcers, multiple ulcerated, eroded lesions. The horse was fed the cool gut. The management and feed did not change. The horse was trailered a long distance, competed for 3 weeks away at a show, trailered back. And the only thing that had changed was the horse was having the cool gut. Scoped the horse again. The veterinarians didn't know what we were testing, so they were somewhat blind. They just knew we were trialing a supplement. And they were quite astonished to see that they couldn't even find prominent scar tissue in the areas where there were grade 3 ulcers only 3 weeks prior. Which leads me to some of that new information that I wanted to share about the cool gut. So omeprazole, which is the primary ingredient in your GastroGuard, UlcerGuard, which is what we call a proton pump inhibitor or a hydrogen blocker. They block the acid. They're shown to be very effective when used short term, 8 to 28, 30 days. Long-term use may actually cause what we call this acid rebound effect, where we actually see over the long term more acid being secreted. This results, it can also interfere with calcium absorption, leading to bone demineralization and bone fractures. So, your proton pump inhibitors, your omeprazole-based products, are designed, as I said, for short-term use, no longer than 30 days. They are widely overused and widely fed at small doses over the long term. A recent study done in 2016 showed, though, the comparison of omeprazole to Succeed, a widely used nutritional supplement for hindgut health. The study showed in horses fed that omeprazole was effective at reducing ulcer score in horses for the first 30 days, but after more than 2 months, 90 days of treatment, omeprazole reduced its efficacy, and Succeed was shown to have more effect than omeprazole after 90 days. So what does that mean for the Cougar? Well, we know that Succeed, the primary ingredient in Succeed is L-glutamine. But the DAC Cougar has over 25 times more L-glutamine than Succeed. 10,000 milligrams of L-glutamine per daily dose in the Cougar versus 389 milligrams per daily dose in the Succeed. Succeed does not have the buffering agent of calcium carbonate. It does have yeast. It has irradiated yeast, which is not live. It has moss, but it's not the amount is not listed. Whey protein concentrate, phos, glycine, and DHA. Succeed does not have any of these. So Cougar is for foregut and hindgut health. The addition of calcium carbonate, whey protein concentrate, phos, glycine, and DHA, in my opinion, make Cougar a superior product to Succeed. The directions for use on the Cougar, and I should also mention that the price per serving of Succeed is around $3.65 versus Cougar at around $1.45, $1.50. So the price is significantly different also. Now, over the time that we've had the Cougar launched, I have gotten the question, well, if I just want to feed Cougar as a maintenance, can I feed it at less than the 3 ounces a day? Or if my horse has really, really severe ulcers, should I feed it more than 3 ounces a day? The answer is no. The feeding rate is 3 ounces a day. Whether you're just feeding it as a maintenance or your horse has severe ulcers, the feeding rate is 3 ounces a day. It does have on the feeding directions, which, by the way, is 3 scoops per day. It says on the directions, for best results, provide the dose 30 to 60 minutes prior to exercise. Now, this is ideal to cope with that splash effect. You know, when I showed you the graph of the pressure on the stomach pushing that acid up. So if you can do this, it's ideal, but it doesn't have to be fed that way. So don't say, oh, I can't feed the Cougar because I can't feed my horse it right before I exercise. It's still going to be extremely effective when feeding it in the morning or in the evening, whenever you want to feed it. That 3 ounces a day is based on a 1,000-pound horse. So, like every feeding recommendation, if it's a 2,000-pound horse, feed 6 ounces. If it's a 500-pound horse, feed 1.5 ounces. Questions? Has anybody got any questions? Now, if you have questions, please feel free to email me. I know that all of you have my email address. Or contact if you're one of the dealers, feel free to contact your local sales rep. If you're watching this on our YouTube channel, also please feel free to contact the office if you have questions, or contact your local representative or your dealer. Thanks again.